Trade wars resurface, U.S. exports, Canada and Mexico tariffs, shake global markets. What if I told you that the next shock to the U.S. economy might not come from inflation, interest rates, or even the stock market, but from trade wars we thought were already behind us? Over the past few weeks, something quiet but powerful has been happening. U.S. exports are starting to slow, tariff threats are resurfacing, and the countries involved aren't rivals halfway across the world. They're America's closest neighbors, Canada and Mexico. When trade tensions rise with the people you trade with the most, the impact moves fast. Prices shift, markets react, jobs feel the pressure. And most people don't notice until it's already hitting their wallets. This isn't breaking news flashing across your screen every minute, but make no mistake, global markets are watching closely and they're already responding. The question is no longer if trade wars are coming back. The real question is how big the impact could be this time. For years, trade wars were treated like a temporary phase, something governments use as leverage and then quietly walk away from. But history shows that once tariffs are on the table, they rarely stay small. They spread, they escalate, and they hit everyday people long before politicians feel the consequences. Right now, the United States is facing renewed trade pressure, just as the global economy is already fragile. Export-driven industries are feeling the squeeze, manufacturers are dealing with higher costs, and investors are growing uneasy. When uncertainty enters the system, markets don't wait for confirmation, they move early, and they move fast. What makes this moment especially important is who's involved. Canada and Mexico aren't just trading partners, they're deeply woven into the American economy. Cars, built in the U.S., rely on parts from Mexico. U.S. farmers depend on Canadian buyers. Energy flows across borders every day without most people even thinking about it. When tariffs start interfering with these relationships, it doesn't just affect spreadsheets, it disrupts supply chains that took decades to build. The result is higher costs, delays, and a ripple effect that spreads far beyond the border. In this video, we're going to break all of that down in simple terms. No political noise, no complicated trade language, just a clear look at what's happening, why it matters right now, and how these new trade tensions could affect American jobs, prices, and financial markets in the months ahead. By the end, you'll understand why global markets are reacting, who stands to lose the most, and why trade wars, once they resurface, are never just about trade. What if I told you that the next big shock to global markets isn't CET coming from interest rates, inflation, or a sudden crash, but from trade wars quietly making a comeback? Right now, as you're watching this, the United States is facing renewed trade tensions with the last countries anyone expected, Canada and Mexico. These aren't distant rivals. These are America's closest trading partners. And when trade breaks down with the people you do the most business with, the impact doesn't take years. It hits fast, it hits quietly, and it hits everyday people first. Prices start to rise, supply chains slow down, markets react, and most people don't connect the dots until the damage is already done. For a long time, trade wars felt like a chapter that had already closed, a loud phase, lots of headlines, and then things moved on. But history shows that trade wars don't actually end. They pause. And now, under the surface, they're starting to resurface again. U.S. exports are losing momentum just as the global economy is already under stress. New tariff talks and policy changes are creating uncertainty, and financial markets hate uncertainty more than bad news. When investors don't know what's coming next, they move early. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. If you're finding this breakdown useful already, take a second and hit like and subscribe to the channel. Here on the Silver Collapse Report, we don't chase headlines, we connect the dots behind them, so you understand what's really happening before it shows up in your wallet. What makes the situation so serious is how deeply connected the US, Canada, and Mexico really are. This isn't just about goods crossing borders. It's about shared supply chains built over decades. A single car sold in the US might cross the border 5 or 6 times during production. Farmers in the Midwest rely heavily on exports to Canada and Mexico. Energy flows between these countries every single day. When tariffs disrupt that flow, costs rise on every step of the process. Businesses pay more, companies pass those costs down, and consumers feel it at checkout. A lot of people still believe that tariffs punish foreign countries. That's not how it works. Tariffs are paid by the companies importing goods, and those costs don't disappear. They get passed directly to consumers. That means higher prices for cars, food, electronics, and everyday items. It also means thinner margins for businesses, pressure on jobs, and slower economic growth. And when multiple countries respond with their own tariffs, the damage multiplies quickly. Global markets are reacting not because the situation is catastrophic yet, but because the risk is growing. Investors remember how fast trade disputes escalated in the past. Once retaliation begins, it becomes hard to stop. Currency markets shift, stock markets grow volatile, and capital starts moving to safer assets. That's often the first warning sign that something bigger may be coming. The real danger isn't just higher prices, it's long-term damage to trust. Trade works best when rules are predictable and relationships are stable. When businesses don't know what the rules will look like next quarter, they stop expanding, they delay hiring, they cut investment. And over time, that slows the entire economy. Trade wars often promise protection, but what they usually deliver is higher costs and slower growth. What we're watching now is the early stage. Not panic, not collapse, but pressure building quietly. This is how major economic shifts usually begin. Not with a single headline, but with small changes that add up over time. And that's why understanding this moment matters. Because once trade wars fully return, reversing them becomes much harder. Before you go, I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think these trade tensions will fade, or are we heading into another long period of global economic friction? Drop your opinion in the comments, and if you found this video helpful, share it with someone who wants to understand how global markets really work. Stay informed, stay ahead, and I'll see you in the next report here on the Silver Collapse Report. As we wrap this up, here's the key thing to remember. Trade wars rarely announce themselves in a dramatic way. They don't start with crashing markets or emergency headlines. They begin quietly with small policy shifts, rising tariffs, and growing uncertainty that most people ignore at first. But over time, those small changes stack up and the effects become impossible to avoid. What's happening right now between the US, Canada, and Mexico is a reminder that global trade is fragile, and when pressure builds, it doesn't stay contained. It spreads through markets, through businesses, and eventually into everyday life. This isn't about fear or panic, it's about awareness. When trade relationships strain, prices rise, jobs feel pressure, and growth slows long before official data catches up. The markets are reacting not because the worst has happened, but because they can see the risk forming ahead. And history shows that once trade conflicts escalate, pulling them back under control becomes incredibly difficult. That's why staying informed matters more than ever. If you're trying to understand where the economy may be heading and how these global shifts could affect your money, your job, or your future, make sure you stay connected. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on where you think this goes next, and share this video with someone who should be paying attention to what's happening right now. Thanks for watching, and for being part of the Silver Collapse Report. We'll continue breaking down the signals, the risks, and the real stories behind the headlines so you're never caught off guard.